Are we on? Okay, I think I heard yes. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to today's Finance and Appropriations Committee meeting. Today is Wednesday, October 13th. Today we have a fairly robust agenda. We'll begin, of course, with the convening of the meeting's approval of the minutes, our monthly finance report, and our 5-year forecast, and then we'll move to adjournment. But right now, Mr. Treasurer, can we take the roll, good sir?
Board Member Brown, he's present by Zoom, will not count towards a quorum and cannot vote.
But thank you. I'm glad to see you, Eric.
Board Member Cole.
Thank you.
Present.
Mr. Green,
Here.
Ms. Johnson, Mr. Jordan,
Here.
Mr. Miller,
Present.
and Board Member Ragland.
Here.
You do have a quorum, President.
All right, thank you, sir. Let's go on ahead to approval of the minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Chairman, I move we approve the minutes
Is there a
from the
second?
September 15th, 2021 Finance and Appropriations Committee meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Ragland. Is there a second?
A second.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Board Member Cole,
Yes.
Mr. Green,
Yes.
Mr. Jordan,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Board Member Ragland,
Yes.
motion carried.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. All right, moving on to our monthly financial report. Mr. Treasurer.
Okay. Thank you, Chair Cole. This is the monthly financial report for September, third month of the fiscal year. September highlights for year-to-date include that total revenues are now below plan, 52 million, and expenditures are below plan, 62 million. For the month, they were 36 million and 21 million under plan, respectively. Our cash balance therefore stands at about 437 million, or about 10 million above plan at this point. These variances in both revenue and expenditures are indicative of the major change that's occurred relative to the new state funding formula. And I've included here some comments from last meeting indicating that that change has to do with, on the revenue side, the fact that students will be funded where educated. Therefore, it takes our gross state aid lower, and that the deductions for community schools and vouchers will no longer exist. They will not be a deduction from our formula, and therefore that results in expenditures being lower as well. So since this spending plan is based upon the May forecast, which did not account for that, because we didn't know that it was going to happen back then, the spending plan then therefore is expecting more in revenue and more in expenditures than what we will be experiencing. So these results, typically in the area of state aid and purchase services where the charter school deduction lives, are more indicative of this change and not really a behavioral change for us in the district. Once we adopt the November 5-year forecast, which I'll discuss here as the next item on the agenda, once we have that adopted by the board, I will incorporate that into the spending plan and bring that back then, hopefully with maybe the November report, but certainly by the December report, so that we then begin to look at these variances month to month, and it'll be against that November plan, so we know how we're doing against the November plan. On the revenue side, again, 52 million year to date, and as I just mentioned, it's state aid primarily at about 53 million below plan. And again, that's because of the change in the funding formula, and that should be adjusted, in the November-December timeframe. The property tax allocation resolved itself. The variance we had last month resolved itself, and we are now just about 354,000 within plan. So that worked itself out. In terms of the other revenue items, you can see property tax here is right on plan, and that other revenues are running a little bit over plan, and that other financing sources, which is primarily transfers and advances, are currently running under plan. And those are typically just timing issues in that category. I wanted to share with the committee just this kind of picture of variances. One of the things that I'll talk to you I think at just about every quarter, is to look at our variances on a quarterly basis. Sometimes we see that as we look at these things monthly, we'll see a variance, but it's just timing, and they often work themselves out within that quarter. So I'll be taking a snapshot at quarterly just to give you an idea that, not that we don't want to look at this monthly, but if you look at it quarterly, some of it smooths itself out over time. So you can see here that we had quite the spike in August in revenue because of a property tax settlement. But because the plan called for some of that revenue to be in July, it came in August. But by September, it's worked itself out, and we now get a better picture of where we are. So I just don't want us to overreact on a monthly basis, because often on a quarterly smoothing, it works out better. On the expenditure side, again, you can see here what jumps off of this chart is that there are relatively no expenditures in that charter voucher area. The only expenditures that appear there now are having to do with College Credit Plus plan. And so this is running $50 million below plan. Again, once we incorporate the new November five-year forecast, first of all, that bar on this graph will go away because we won't be doing a charter call out anymore because it won't exist. Personnel is running $14.9 million below the plan year to date. We are much closer this month. I told you that September would be a little bit better indication when we get on the new salary schedules and new staff come on board. We were $2.3 million under plan this month versus 7.5 and 5.1 in July and August respectively. So kind of true to form, our actual has now come closer to our plan for that month. Looking at all the other expenditures, you can see here some above plan, some below plan, but they work themselves out collectively to be about $2.7 million above plan. Supplies and capital outlay are running above plan a bit. Again, this is all due to timing issues, so we'll see over the next quarter how that works out. But overall, they net out to about $2.7 million above plan. So that being said, we are running under plan in revenues and expenditures, but that's solely due to this change in funding. What we have to look forward to next is using that November five-year forecast as the basis for our monthly spending plan. As I said, it will significantly impact two lines, state aid and purchase services. The charter call-out will be eliminated. And again, by that late November, December timeframe, we should hear from ODE that they have built the model into their systems and will be able to report out to us on that. Right now, the foundation funding spreadsheets that we get, or the reports that we get, the SFPRs, are based upon some estimates and last year's data. So they're nice, but they don't really help us a lot. So we really won't know what it really looks like for us based upon current enrollment and how that mechanism works. We really won't know that until December. So stay tuned, I guess, is the story there. With that, Chairman Cole, that concludes my report for September, and I stand ready to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Mr. Treasurer. Are there any questions by the committee at this point in time? All right. Mr. Brown, do you have any questions, sir?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you. All
Thank
right.
you.
We can then move on to our five-year forecast. And for those who may be watching, this just means, in layman's terms, that Mr. Treasurer gave a good reading that gives us an outlook in the past, on a snapshot of the past that has us in good financial health. So we are in good standing financially as a school district. I always want to kind of keep that in mind, how to say these things in everyday Joe's terms, everyday Joe and Jane.
All right, thank you. So here we are with the five-year forecast. This is the November presentation of this forecast. November kind of is the start for our forecasting season, if you will. A year of history rolls off of this forecast because it's 3 years of actual, 5 years of projected. So 2018, fiscal 2018 rolls off, and 2026 rolls in as a forecast year. There we go. I always like to lead, as you know, with a few little quips about putting this in perspective and putting you in that forecasting environment. This is one of my favorite, funny, if you will, quips that forecasting is very difficult, especially if it's about the future. And giving credit to Board Member Brown, he shared with me this quote that I will share with you, and that the goal of forecasting is not to predict the future, but to tell you what you need to know to take meaningful action in the present. And I think that's a very apt quote, because as you look at this forecast, you're going to hear me talk about what the next steps are, and the next steps are to look even further into the future to see what, if anything, we might need to do today to impact those out years, even beyond the 5th year of this forecast. So we'll get to that. But I think keep that in mind, that we're not necessarily trying to predict the future, but we're projecting out there to see if there's something we need to do today to address what we see out there. As you know, we do have a legal requirement to prepare a 5-year forecast in November, by November of each year. That changed from October in prior years, several years ago. And then we also need to do an update between April and May. Typically, we do it in May of each fiscal year. And also do an update when events take place that will significantly change the forecast. So, quite frankly, the significant event that occurred was this new funding formula. And I was already in the midst of preparing the forecast in August and knew that I'd be bringing it to you soon here. So there was no need to accelerate that in terms to trigger an update like in September and then turn around and do another one in October that wouldn't be any different. So, but that's our legal requirement. And just my closing statement on the intro is that this forecast it's a snapshot. So we kind of take all this information and we freeze them in time right now and say, what's the best information we have right now? Put that together, and what's that paint for us in the future? Knowing full well that there are a lot of assumptions, variables that we don't have control over, and a lot of variables that have yet to be defined, and I'll be discussing some of those as we move forward. I can tell you this, the fiscal years 19, 20, and 21, they're not going to change now. We're good to go. Those are done. They're
You mean
in place.
20 and 21?
Yeah, fiscal year 19, 20, and 21,
Oh, okay.
they're in the book.
I'm sorry.
We're done. We're all done
I'm like,
with
he's
those.
in the wrong century.
Yeah. Did I say 19?
You said 19.
We're going back to the future.
I meant fiscal, yeah. What,
Thank you.
Those 3 years, it's, the older I get, the funnier I get, I think, I guess. So here's the presentation on the 5-year forecast. And this is the story of this 5-year forecast. What are the changes since last May? And the story is this. This state funding formula had an impact on our projected cash balance in 2 ways. First, looking at the orange line, this is the cumulative effect of the change in in the amount of state aid that we're receiving. In a ballpark sense, our gross state aid was calculated with around 75,000 students. But net, we ended up in the 49,000 range after about 20,000 kids or so went off to charter and vouchers. Well, those children are now being funded where they're educated, not being run through us. So necessarily, our revenue will come down. And that's the accumulative effect of that revenue change where our aid will drop. It accumulates to having this 5-year impact. Now, this is the 5 years that was in the May forecast. I'm not showing 26 now because it wasn't in the May forecast. But relative to the ending cash balance projected for FY25 back in May, that revenue drop would have cost us about $662 million in a decline in cash balance. However, those students are now funded where they're educated, meaning you don't have to make a deduction from our foundation formula for them. So they're not in the top in the revenue. Now they're not below the line in expenditures. As you can see, those expenditures, when you pull them out of our forecast, they accumulate to a reduced expenditures, improvement in cash balance. They improve our cash balance by $897 million. And the net result of that is that our fiscal 25 ending cash balance has improved by $235 million. Somebody's going to say, Stan, how is this possible? Two things. Well, three things. One, conservative forecasting, meaning typically we, I'll say, underestimate revenues to a degree and overestimate expenditures so that we tend to, as experience plays out, do better than the forecast. It's conservative. It gives us early warning signals. And knowing that, we can temper our response to any sort of financial warning signal that we get. So that's conservative. So in that vein, in terms of state aid, we flat projected that. No increase in state aid over time. But when it came to the community school and voucher deductions, because it was expenditures and because we figured it would probably grow over time, we budgeted in, we forecasted in an increase in that number. So the differential between the revenue forecast and the expenditure forecast gets larger each year, so you add a little bit more each year to that cash balance. And that's why the reduction in expenditures exceeded the reduction in our revenue estimates. So pulling together what it looked like back in May versus now in November, you can see in 22 the drop. Back in May, $973 million in total revenues projected. Now in November, $793 million. And so on throughout. You can still see the total revenues are fairly flat out there in 23, 24, and 25, but note that there was that drop in those years. Getting on the expenditure side, you can see a concurrent or like kind of reduction. And we'll get into this actual difference in a bit, but graphically you can see here that, you know, that's more like a $200 million drop versus a $180 million drop in revenues. And in fact, it ranges from about 210 in FY22 to 230 million in FY25. And I'll get to the two drivers of those changes in a moment. Pulling the forecast together graphically here, this is total revenues and total expenditures in the 5-year forecast out to 2026. You can see in 2021 in May, we had projected, you can see we built a cash balance back in 21 a bit. And then these bar graphs are very, very close, and that represents whether or not we're going to build a cash balance or eat into our cash balance, which is best shown by this next graph. And this is the revenue over under expenditures graph. Back in May is the blue line. You can see in 21 we expected to eat into our cash balance at about 18 million. It ended up being only about 10 million. And then, rather than continue to have expenses exceed revenues in the future years, you can see that we actually have built in a slight surplus, 17 million in 22, a forecasted 11 million. Additional build in cash balance in 23, pretty much break even in 24, and it's not until 25 that we see that cash balance line turn south and we begin to eat into that cash balance that has built up. So this is the net impact on cash balance from May to this November forecast. The blue line is the May forecast for cash balance. The orange line is the new one now for November. You can see that from 72 million in 25 projected back in May, it's increased to 307 million for the end of 2025. I've added the reserved cash balance line to be indicative of reserving 30 days of expenditures. The interesting thing to note here is that in May, 2025 went negative. In other words, we weren't meeting our 30-day reserved cash in the May forecast. And now in November, we do meet the 30-day reserved cash target throughout the life of this forecast. So a couple of things that are early indicators to us. The first one is, when do you start to deficit spend, if you will? When does that cash balance line turn and have a negative slope to it. In this particular case, it's out there at around 2025, as opposed to back in 2021 in the May forecast. But the line does turn, and it will continue to turn absent something that we do, and that's going to be a discussion here down the line. So here's the first major driver to those changes in revenues and expenditures, and this is state aid and how it changed from May to November. Back in May, we were looking at $356 million, again, projected flat for each year in state aid. For 22 and 23, we went back and used the best information we have at this point in time, and that is LSC's estimate during the budget bill discussions. So we plugged in those numbers, and we've come up with $169 million for 22, $181 million for 23. Then we held that $181 million constant 24, 25, and also into 26. So that's one of the pieces that's a big driver of the increase in cash balance. Interestingly enough, that change in funding has now changed the percentage makeup of our revenues. In 21, you can see that we were 54% local property tax dependent and 37% state aid. But as I just said, that state aid included funding for all the students that eventually or subsequently went on and left the district. They weren't students that we were educating here, but the revenue came in and then the expenses went out. So it distorted the picture of the amount of state aid that we were getting to educate the students that remained here that we were actually teaching. So we were 54 and 37%, respectively, for those categories. Now, with the new model, it's changed dramatically. This represents funding that is supporting the in-district education of the students that stay here with us. This now is 70% supported by general property tax and only 21% through the state aid funding formula. And you'll hear talk, some of this talk gets a little confusing. They'll say, well, you are going to get more state aid in the aggregate, more state aid per pupil. While that's true, when you look at the funding relative to the students that we educate here in the district, their support of us is not over 30%, it's 21% of the support, and the local property taxpayers are supporting us at the 70% level. So I know, Board Member Cole, you've always asked me, are we still 54-37, and I always verify that for you, but now it's shifted. We're now 70% property tax, 21% state aid, and only 9% pretty much unchanged for all the other sources of revenue.
Just with that in mind right now, are there any questions?
Do you know, is that, what does that look like as you talk to your colleagues in other schools? Is that a pretty consistent, would you say? I mean, as they look at their state aid, is it a 70-21 like what you're talking about, or is it, do you have a sense of that yet?
I do not have a sense of that. I don't. I
That's-
would say
'cause it's
this, though.
interesting.
It would, we probably are experiencing, the comparison between those two charts, we are experiencing probably the largest shift because we had the largest proportion of
Right.
charter revenue and charter expense. So this change for us is much more dramatic than probably any other school district.
Gotcha, thank you.
Yep. Can I have
Particularly suburban and rural, but yes.
Yeah.
just a quick question as well? Is the overall state aid, I see what it's doing to us, our district, but is the overall state aid across Ohio increasing or decreasing? Do we know that?
I'm going to have my charge d'affaires here answer that question.
Given the new school funding formula, state aid, statewide, additional dollars were invested in the state, into the new funding formula. How that shapes out district to district varies, as you can well expect. My understanding is every school district in the state did see an increase, at least over this next fiscal year. So, but in the aggregate, on the macro level, yes, there was an increase in state funding.
Okay, so there was an increase overall in state funding. Okay, and then, can I have,
Yes.
can I ask, put a decrease in our number just because of the funding formula, the way it works with our district?
Well, for the students that remain here, we do see an increase.
Okay,
For the students that remain here, we do see an increase. What happens is that the revenue item, the revenue line and the expenditure line both go down. And so when you look at the dollars per pupil, which we were just doing today, there is an increase in dollars per pupil that come to us over the next 2 years. So there is an increase. And assuming that LSC's estimates are reasonably close, even though they're using, prior year's data, this should hold true once we get to December and see the actual printout. The interesting thing about this now, though, is we are on a formula. And albeit it's a phased-in formula, but it's still a formula. So as we see how many students actually we have, that number can go up or it can go down, as it would for any district, based upon enrollment, the various categories of students that we teach, special ed, gifted, vocational, things like that, that lead into that aid calculation. But we can see this, if we would lose 5,000 students between, last year and this year, we'll see our state aid go down. Heretofore, we were so, deep into the cap, you could plus or minus 5,000 students and it wouldn't have an impact one way or the other. This new model really makes enrollment a variable that we'll want to know about. We being, I'll have to be aware of it much more than I've ever had in the past because it's going to impact what this number does. That help?
yes, thank you.
All right, the second item that is a major contributor to that change in ending cash balance is on the expenditure side. This is in purchase services, and in purchase services, as you know, the bulk of that is the charter and voucher deduction. So you can see here, we had 280, 288, 296, and 305 million planned and projected in the forecast. And as I said before, remember state aid was flat? This was going up. What remains after we take out, almost $220 million of budgeted charter and voucher expense is in the $63-65 million range. So you can see that was a over $220 million pickup in terms of reduced expenditures, counteracting the 190 million drop in revenues for the way the state aid is now calculated. Now, this also changed the makeup of our expenditure categories on a percent to total basis. Heretofore, I'd report out and say, well, we're 60% personnel and 27% purchase services. And I would remind everyone when I did this presentation, that's not the typical school district, that the typical school district was more like the 80-85%, maybe a little bit higher in terms of personnel costs and a concurrent, lesser amount in purchase services. And when I did that call out, I would pull the deductions out, rerun the graph, and you'd see how that comes true. Well, now I don't have to do a call out anymore because when you look at the 22 numbers that I've put in, this is what the graph now looks like. And honest to John here, I swear to you, I did not make the chart first and then make the numbers come out to be exactly 85%. But when I ran it and I looked at it and went, son of a gun, how about that? It ended up being 85% for personnel, 8% for purchase services, and 7% for everything else. So when you think about what are our drivers of expense for a school district, it should be no shock. We are a personnel business. And that's where we focus our attention for teaching and learning, and that's what drives our expenditures. So I think this is a much more accurate picture of the true expense makeup for running our educational program here in Columbus. So that's the new picture that you'll see going forward. Now, for everybody who likes the data and the numbers, I provided this chart. This is the annual change from the May forecast, or the annual contribution to that change in cash balance. So if we look at the under annual change there, the first few lines are all revenue. You can see that I tweaked property taxes a bit. Reappraisal, actual experience, So I was able to raise our property tax revenue estimates a bit, about 1.9% each year. It added 4 million, 8.9, 8.9, 10 million, 13 million to the forecast on an annual basis. So on a 950 to close to $1 billion operation, not a huge impact, but a tweak, as I call it. I did talk to you about the green bar line there, state aid, and you can see there, look at the contribution there. And its contribution, because it was lower, it's negative, pulling out 186 million, 175, 175, and 175. Flat again, because that's how we projected it. All other revenues, no big change from May. So on an annual basis, you can see there that the change in revenues, 180, roughly 166, 165, 162 million each year. On the expenditure side, we did tweak the personnel a bit. As always, I've included the increases that are currently negotiated through collective bargaining agreements, and I have placeholders out into the future for other increases. I have incorporated a staffing plan, as I mentioned in the executive summary. I incorporated a staffing plan that is now a good 8 months old, so it's stale. To be honest with you, no sense going through those details because those are all going to change in the next couple of months as the superintendent and HR build their staffing plan for the coming year. We'll be bringing that back to FAC in March. You'll hear about that plan. I put that in, best information I have, it's placeholders for staffing. So know that there are positions built in there. We'll just have to see going down the road when they give me the new plan. I'll take the old plan out, put the new plan in, and we'll see how that plays out in May. And then all other expenditures, no big change. But you can see in purchase services there's the large number, 217 million. Now that's a positive number because expenditures go down. This is impact on cash balance. So there was a $270 million improvement, 224, 231, 238. That's on an annual basis. On an accumulative basis, so that I explained to you exactly where the 235 million improvement in cash balance came from, you can see here that clearly those two line items on a cumulative basis contribute to that $235 million improvement. Over this 5-year period, that decrease in state aid reduced the cash balance by $711 million. The purchase services line, though, that reduction improved the cash balance by $908 million. And yet, guess what? We're not doing anything different here. This is more of an accounting convention than it is a behavioral change in what we're doing here in the district. So we've taken out something that was strictly just flow-through dollars that, quite frankly, just caused confusion, that I think didn't really truly depict our financial situation very well. And we've removed it. And that's why we were so much in favor of the Fair School Funding Formula and for direct funding of charters and vouchers. And at least out of all of that, we got what we want. We didn't get a promise that they would fund us for all 6 years to fully integrate this. So we've got 2 years that we're assured of. We're going to have to go back and continue the fight to ensure that that Fair School Funding model continues to be incrementally funded until we get to a full funding status. So this explains to you the accumulation through the 5-year period and what the contributors are. Again, this big change has all to do with that new Fair School Funding Formula. So this last chart just brings together your 5-year forecast. You can see the cash balance and the reserved cash balance and the relationship of revenues, and total expenditures. Key takeaways, other than those that I mentioned here in my executive summary. You got the funding formula changes. You've got an ending cash balance and a reserved cash balance that remain positive throughout the forecast. You have a cash balance that begins to turn south, where expenditures exceed revenues around fiscal 25. And those are the big takeaways here. And I know one of the elephants in the living room is, well, Stan, what's this say to us about our levy planning? Because that's one of the key things that the board does. The board, is the authority that puts a levy on the ballot. That's one of their main statutory functions. And my answer to that is, Doesn't tell you the complete picture. It's a start. The next step is I'm going to trend this out for 27, 28, and 29. Why do I do that? If you can recall my presentations about levy timing and the timing of collections. So to take, for example, the November 22 ballot that we'll be talking about, voting in 22, you're in the middle of fiscal year 23, and based upon how collections are made, it's really to fund not the current fiscal year, but the 4 succeeding fiscal years. So if you vote in 22, you're voting to fund 24, 25, 26, and 27. 27's not on our chart yet. I have to bring that to you in the coming months. In planning, we also want to look to the next cycle, another 2 years. Another 2 years down the road is 24. 24 is a presidential election year, usually a pretty favorable year for school levies, big turnout, generally pretty favorable. That's why you try and work around 4-year levy cycles typically. So we'll look at 24. Again, in 24, we're in the middle of fiscal year 25. So it's not to fund 25, it's to fund 26, 27, 28, and 29, which is why earlier I said I need to run this projection out just on a trend basis to fiscal 29. With that data, I'll come back to the committee, and we can begin to noodle, what's that tell us? What's the cash balance really do? How do we feel about some of the variables? What's the probability that something might change? Are we too conservative? Are we not conservative enough? But that's a conversation for the committee to have that we've put on the calendar for discussion in November and December as we look forward to later then discussions about another levy opportunity, which is the PI levy needs and life cycle replacement. So, guys, with that in mind, that concludes my presentation of the 5-year forecast. If you have any questions other than the ones you've already raised, let me know. I will be making this presentation to the board at their first board meeting in November. The date escapes me.
November 3rd.
November 3rd. It's a Wednesday because November 2nd is Election Day. So we'll do it on November 3rd, and then on November 16th, it will be slated for approval by the board, and then we'll submit it to ODE. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you,
Chairman Cole.
Mr. Treasurer. Just one quick second, though, before I get to your question. I want to make sure folks who are here, the committee, and of course our listening audience, also understand that there'll be some other evaluative drivers, so to speak, okay? So there's some additional drivers. We currently have underway a facilities master plan process underway right now, where we're taking a really deep dive look into aspirationally what we'd like to see for Columbus City Schools, and also what we need in terms of, as the treasurer alluded to, deferred maintenance, ongoing things that not only include our buildings, but also our other assets, such as bus drive, buses and transportation, things to those effects. So let's keep in mind, too, that they're going to be alongside these conversations, some drivers that we have that give us an even stronger indication of whether or not when this whole operating levy and bond and PI conversations happen, these are things that will walk right alongside of it, line and step, even on the staff side as well. So there'll be some evaluation taking place even on the staff side. Right now, we've been able to leverage ESSER dollars. We got those dollars coming in for the next few years. But with that in mind, there's an evaluative piece that comes along with that where we brought some folks on. Ideally, Michael Cole would love to see us maintain capacity and ideally grow it for the betterment of our district and our students. But again, that's the evaluative side of that, where we really are looking at measuring impact, okay? So impact is going to kind of guide our zero-based budget behavioral budget kind of modeling that we're doing now, where we're looking at how we're spending and why. Are there any questions? Am I saying that? Am I articulating that correctly, Dr. Roush? He's like, no.
I think you said that very well, Chairman Cole.
Okay. Are there any questions thus far? Mr. Ragland?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you alluded to my first question was around those ESSER dollars and how much of an impact did they play in your forecast here? I know they're going to go away after a while. Can you talk a little bit about how you either incorporated them in this iteration of the forecast and what we can expect regarding those monies moving forward?
Sure. Initially, when all the federal dollars were announced, the various iterations of that, 'cause there are several different pieces of federal legislation that authorized different amounts. But as those came out, my first mantra to everybody was, don't create recurring expenses out of non-recurring income.
Yes.
And then I modified that because I didn't want to be too harsh to the academic folks and say, unless there's a good reason to. And if you have, if you want to continue, you have to let me know so I can build in the forecast. So the original idea was it would be one-time initiatives. As we've gotten into it, then we identify not only new staffing or new non-personnel items to fund with the federal dollars. There are some positions that have been identified that we can move from the general fund, at least temporarily, over to ESSER dollars. And I did incorporate that into the forecast.
Thank you. My next question, do you have a handle on our loss in enrollment over a short period of time, say from fiscal year 21 to now? Maybe how many students we have lost and what the impact on the overall budget is with the loss of those young people?
I do not, sir.
Okay.
I do not. In the past, enrollment tracking has been over in accountability, and they do that for their purposes, but for my purposes, I have not, quite frankly, paid a whole lot of attention to enrollment changes because it's not been a driver in my funding.
Yes, sir.
I think, though, to Board Member Ragland's point, I think maybe that's a deeper conversation, a more, how can I say, cross-sectional conversation.
Yeah,
That's a much more
Yes, sir.
cross-sectional conversation that can be had within the organization as to how do we grow it. Because this is one of the, in my mind, progressive assumptions about the 5-year forecast moving forward. To me, it's how do we look at
Right.
growing our student capacity?
recouping.
If
That's right.
at the end of the day, we know that it's direct dollars going to our kids who are coming here that's actually increasing our budget. We also know how negatively, adversely impacted we are if we lose students. So you alluded to that earlier in your comments about the implications of loss of students. But to your credit and to what you're saying, I think it's time for us to think more cross-sectionally about student attendance, student participation, and how we track that in terms of dollars. Is our superintendent on?
Yes,
she
I'm
is.
here.
There you go. Did you have any additional comments, Dr. Dixon?
No, I think the team captured everything well, and we have Catherine here too, who's been monitoring those ESSER dollars. And as Stan stated, we know there are going to be some broader conversations. That's the program about programming, et cetera. So we're looking forward to those discussions. And as you said, Chair Cole, we're looking at impact, and that's one of the things that's the driver of our additional dollars. And we've hired additional personnel, but we want to make sure that those strategies have impact on student outcomes. And so that's very important of us so that we can show how we spent these dollars and have some data to show how well we spent them and the impact of those funds on, as I stated, on student outcomes.
Thank you for that. Mr. Brown, did you, I know you kind of, we lost you for a second there. Are you clear and good to go? Do you have any questions? Okay, maybe he's good to go. I think I'm seeing some fingers go up. A thumb. Is he sending up a thumb or?
I don't think his video's working.
Oh,
Chair Cole.
okay. Well, nonetheless, if he's got any questions, we can most assuredly answer them prior to our board meeting, certainly again, prior to this presentation. With that, If there are no questions, is there a motion?
Can I make one quick comment,
Yes,
Chair?
absolutely. Go ahead.
Just to let you know, we had a request to modify our schedule of presentations, and Catherine Mosier would like to do her ESSER update in November rather than December. So if that's okay with everybody, we will do that. And did I have another announcement I needed to make that I didn't write down, so I've forgotten it?
That was the big one right there.
That was the big one, okay. If I think of it, I'll write to you. I thought there were two, but just so you know, we'll be modifying that calendar just to bring her in November instead of December.
Thank you for that. I do recommend that folks, let's plan for that one. Let's plan to be here for that one. I think this is an important conversation that really adds context to how we're closing some gap, even if it's for a limited amount of time, and particularly given this biennial budget, its lack of further commitment, for the district. This ESSER piece is a big piece for us on the federal side. So I want you guys to at least get a deeper sense of that and some idea about metrically where we are. So thank you for that, Mr. Chairman.
And I'm sorry, another item just came to my mind, and that is, I did this presentation, and it's got my name on it, along with the name of the two gentlemen beside me, Scott Gooding and Eric Roush. But there have been others who have participated in helping pull together data and give me that oversight at a very high level of what I need to put in. Sometimes they'll bring me very small items and I'll chuckle because it's budget dust, but nonetheless, they all contributed. So certainly Catherine, we have worked closely with her and her team in terms of looking at issues related to ESSER and its impact on either taking from or adding to general fund. Mike DeFalvo's team in HR and, a whole array of other folks in my department that, if nothing else, put a second set of eyes on the numbers and the presentation. So this is a collaborative effort, even though I tend to be the point person at these types of affairs. So thanks to all. And we do, if anybody has any questions, let us know. We'll be glad to answer them. And I'll be doing a very similar presentation in November.
All right. Before I call for adjournment, I'm going to give Board Member Brown an opportunity to ask a question, or I think we've gotten it back now. Glad to have you back. What's your question, sir?
I need them.
No, we don't. Are you there?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. I don't know if you heard me a moment ago, but I don't have any questions at the moment. I was able to hear most of the discussion when I got knocked off the internet. And thank you for the presentation. It was very good. And I certainly know where to find you and Eric if I need you.
All right. Thank you kindly. And there's no need, Mr. Treasurer, for us to have to move this forward. I think this is just, we're good to go as is without any vote from the committee. I just want to clarify.
Okay, that sounds fine.
All right. With that, is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion.
I second. Motioned and seconded. And we can just do all favor, aye?
Aye.
All right.
Motion carries.
passes. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for your hard work, due diligence. I will be reaching out to some of us just to let you know that seats are beginning to reopen. I want to be able to follow up. I love to also have recommendations about interested parties, other friends. So if the community is watching, please, by all means, there are some seats available for this committee. For more details, you may contact me at mcole@columbus.k12.oh.us. All right. Thank you.